Hello and welcome. You're watching News Central Television. I am Judith TB. Here are some stories making headlines and rounds beyond the continent. Now, in a dramatic shift in foreign policy, the United Kingdom has suspended negotiations on a new free trade agreement with Israel, summoned the Israeli ambassador in protest over renewed military operations in Gaza. Now, speaking in Parliament, Foreign Secretary David Lammy delivered a sharp rebuke condemning Israel's intensified offensive in the war-torn enclave. Lammy warned that history will judge them, referring to the Israeli government's continued military action, which he described as intolerable and damaging to UK-Israel relations. As part of the response, the UK has imposed sanctions on several Israeli settlers accused of violence against Palestinians in the West Bank. Among those sanctions are Zohar Saba, Haral David Libi, and Daniela Wers, often referred to as the grandmother of the Israeli settler movement, and recently featured in a documentary by Louis Toro. Earlier in the day, Labour Party leader, and that's Keir Starmer, voiced growing concern over the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, stating that Britain, quote, cannot allow the people of Gaza to starve, end quote, and calling the suffering in the region, quote, utterly intolerable, end quote.
Fewer than 10 trucks entered Gaza yesterday. The UN and the World Health Organization have issued stark warnings of the threat of starvation hanging over hundreds of thousands of civilians. Madam Deputy Speaker, this is abominable. Civilians in Gaza facing starvation, homelessness, trauma, desperate for this war to end, now confront renewed bombardment, new displacement, and new suffering. And the remaining hostages, kept apart from their loved ones by Hamas for almost 600 days, are now at heightened risk from the war around them.
But first, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to say something about the horrific situation in Gaza, where the level of suffering, innocent children being bombed again, is utterly intolerable. We repeat our demand for a ceasefire as the only way to free the hostages. We repeat our opposition to settlements in the West Bank. And we repeat our demand to massively scale up humanitarian assistance into Gaza. The recent announcement that Israel will allow a basic quantity of food into Gaza.
Ejike Okpa, Global Affairs Analyst, joins me to discuss UK's decision to halt trade talks with Israel and its broader implications. Mr. Okpa, many thanks for doing this with us. I mean, what economic impact might the suspension of trade talks have on both the UK and Israel in the short and also long term?
Yeah, thank you for having me. It is just very sad that, despite all efforts, made to Netanyahu and his leadership to halt this, conflict, especially the damage on civilians and people that are not involved in the war, he just has been, insensitive. And so it's a welcome development for UK to say, hey, we're going to stop any trade negotiations until there's some resolution to this. Because, if UK were to go ahead and do it, that means they too are guilty by association. I think what we see now, a lot of people are speaking up and saying, how come Israel, this tiny country in the Middle East, has held everybody hostage based on their own perception of what they think they want, and everybody else should do it. So maybe this will force them to come to the table with the Palestinians and come to some solution so that we don't have to see this. We don't have to have family members in this part of the world to feel the pain and the hurt in 21st century. Why should this kind of thing happen? It's inhumane, it is wickedness, I don't know, whatever the case is. If Israel had a sophisticated intelligence, how come they allowed this thing to happen, where hostages were taken? Maybe Netanyahu, wanted it to happen so that he can do what he's doing. But I think the world now is picking up, the world is angered by this, and I'm hoping in a matter of days or weeks, maybe there'll be some cessation and so people can come to some resolution.
Do you see this as a shift in UK foreign policy toward a more valued or values-based or human rights-driven approach?
Yes, I do. Especially, I don't know the last time UK had a black-looking individual as their foreign secretary. Now, this guy is, from Guyana. That's where his parents, his ancestry is from. So now they're beginning to speak up. Maybe because of the trip that Trump had in the Middle East, and then, he sidelined Israel to go to the Middle East, and we how successful that is. Maybe UK is trying to, like China, and say, hey, we too are going to stand up to Israel and cut off any kind of a negotiation regarding trade, because by us doing it, maybe we are considered as an enabling, a factor, enabling nation.
And how might the decision affect the UK's relationships with Arab and Muslim majority nations, particularly those critical of Israel's actions?
Well, it's a wait and see kind of thing. They're going to be, they're watching it. They're going to see what, how long this is going to be and how Israel is going to respond. But again, Israel is one of 193 or so countries in the world. Why should one country, regardless of what their own issues are, why should one country stand up to the whole world and not feel like, hey, we're going to have to give up something? In a conflict, somebody has to give up something. It cannot always be your way. You have to. We studied that in economics, opportunity cost. What are you willing to give up in order to get something? So Israel maybe is beginning to feel the pressure, and the Jewish people all over the world, I'm not saying all of them support this stuff. Some of them too have to be calling on Israel to say, hey, come on, let's step down a little bit and see how we can have a two-nation solution that everybody's talked about, but it really never happened.
And is this move likely to influence Israel's military or political calculus regarding its operations in Gaza?
Of course it's going to. I mean, they're seeing this, whether you're in uniform or civilian clothes, everybody's a human being. When these things start to happen, people are going to go home and say, hey, what are we doing here? They're going to talk to their leadership people. But they also remember there are diehards. There are people who just want the war because they benefit from it. Or they say, their way of saying, hey, I'm going to stick it to you if you don't, because I have more arms than you. But at the end of the day, we all get 24 hours, and when we are not in office, we have our conscience to deal with. And they too have conscience. They're going to be looking at this and said, hey, this is what the world is looking at. Okay, whatever number of hostages that we're taking, okay, how can we come to terms, release them so that civilians don't have to suffer? If this was doing it on the military people, if this was a fight on military to military, to show who the might is, that's different. But now when civilians, women, hospitals, schools are being destroyed, I mean, who want to live in an environment like this, where you don't even know, why you are eating, some bomb is landing, your family member is being killed? You remember when this thing ends, there's still going to be people, there's an after effect, the aftershocks people are going to carry through. So it may not last another decade before they can even forget about it. So we got to do everything. The world leadership, the world leaders have to put some sort of pressure on Israel, and the Hamas people to say, let's end this. This is not what we need to see in the 21st century.
Well, I mean, and just lastly, how does, sanctioning individual Israeli settlers shape the narrative around accountability and civilian protection in the conflict?
Well, there are individuals that are doing this, I mean, there are individuals either because they are powerful or they're in government or they have some authority. So sanctions against them, individuals, just like sometimes we have the sanctions against, Russian oligarchy people or any other country. Maybe that would bring pressure. All we're trying to do, or all the world is trying to do, or what UK is trying to do is to bring pressure on not only Netanyahu but other Israelis who are around him to say, hey, let's talk, let's stop this, let's have a ceasefire, and then go into some negotiation. If it works, and then we go forward. If it doesn't, we know why, and then maybe we just. You never get tired of talking when you have a conflict that people are dying. You never should be tired of it. You should just keep doing the talking until you come to some resolution.
All right, Ejike, I must say thank you for taking out the time to join us. Ejike Okwahi, giving us a bit of insight as Israel has called, as UK has called Israel to order. We switch gears now away from that as Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei says nuclear talks with the United States are unlikely to yield any results, casting doubt on renewed diplomatic efforts aimed at curbing Iran's nuclear program. Speaking on Tuesday, Khamenei's remarks come amid an ongoing standoff over Tehran's uranium enrichment activities, an issue at the heart of international concern. Since April 12th, Iran and the United States have engaged in 4 rounds of indirect nuclear talks mediated by Oman. The negotiations mark the highest level contact between the two nations since the U.S. withdrew from the 2015 nuclear deal. The latest meeting, held on May 11th, was described by Iranian officials as difficult but useful, while U.S. representatives said they were encouraged by the progress. Despite these comments, Iran continues to enrich uranium up to 60% purity, well above the 3.67% cap set by the 2015 agreement and edging closer to weapons-grade levels.
اینی که اصرار بر مذاکره مستقیم میکنن طرف‌ها به خاطر اینه. یک بخش عمده‌اش اینه. ایشون اجازه نداد. البته مذاکرات غیر مستقیم بود، زمان ایشون هم بود، مثل حالا که هست. البته بدون نتیجه، حالا هم گمان نمی‌کنیم به نتیجه برسه. نمی‌دونیم چه خواهد شد. طرف آمریکایی که در این مذاکرات غیر مستقیم وارد صحبت میشن، گفتگو میکنن، سعی کنن یاوه‌گویی نکنن. اینی که بگن ما به ایران اجازه غنیسازی نمیدیم، این غلط زیادی است. کسی منتظر اجازه.
Jordanian Foreign Minister Ayman Fasadi says Syria has entered a new phase and that its success requires giving it a chance to succeed. Safadi said this while speaking during a joint press conference with his Syrian counterpart in Damascus. Now, this comes after European Union countries agreed to end most of its sanctions on the war-scarred country. Western states had imposed a plethora of sanctions on Syria's foreign minister Assad al-Shabani, his inner circle, and the Syrian government as a whole throughout the 14-year civil war, which killed over 500,000 people. The EU had already suspended some restrictions on Syria's key economic sectors in February.
سوريا يتطلب إعطائها الفرصة للنجاح، والعقوبات كانت عائقا كبيرا أمام إنجاز التنمية الاقتصادية. العقوبات ضرورة وستسهم إن شاء الله بتزويد الحكومة السورية الإمكانات التي تحتاجها من أجل أن تستمر في خدمة شعبها، وستتيح للقطاع الخاص أيضا في كل دول العالم أن يعمل من أجل ذلك. اتفقنا على خريطة الطريق لتفعيل التعاون في مجالات الطاقة، المياه، الصناعة، التجارة، النقل، وبحثنا أيضا التعاون في المجال الصحي.
You're watching headlines making rounds beyond the continents. Let's go on a short break, shall we? When we return, UN Health Agency endorses global agreement on future pandemic preparedness. We'll tell you all about this after the break. Stay with us. You're welcome back. Let's turn our attention to North America, where U.S. President Donald Trump says the Republican Party remains unified despite growing internal divisions over a controversial budget bill that has sparked concern across the political spectrum. The bill, currently stalled in Congress, proposes extending Trump's signature tax cuts from his first term, while introducing a series of spending reductions aimed at curbing the nation's soaring deficit. However, the proposed savings have become a major point of contention. Conservative lawmakers are pushing for even deeper cuts to reduce federal spending, while moderates warn that such measures would strip millions of low-income Americans of their Medicaid coverage. Now, despite the friction, President Trump continues to tout the bill as a major legislative milestone for his second term. It follows a chaotic few months in which he has largely relied on executive orders to push his agenda.
Well, it's not a question of holdouts. We have a tremendously unified party. I don't think we've ever had a party like this. There are some people that want a couple of things that maybe I don't like or that they're not going to get. But so this is the biggest tax cut in the history of our country, or you'll get a 68% tax increase. And if that happens, I mean, what Republican could vote for that to happen? Because there wouldn't be a Republican much longer. They would be knocked out so fast. We're not doing any cutting of anything meaningful. The only thing we're cutting is waste, fraud, and abuse. With Medicaid, waste, fraud, and abuse. There's tremendous waste, fraud, and abuse. There's incompetent things put in. We have illegal aliens that are multiple killers with multiple murder records getting Medicaid. I don't think anybody minds if we cut that. The Democrats, on the other hand, are going to destroy it because they're going to leave these people on. No, I don't think Thomas Massie understands government. I think he's a grandstander, Frank.
And off to Mexico, the city of Jalapa is in mourning following the tragic loss of two naval cadets in a ship collision near New York's Brooklyn Bridge. Now, dozens gathered in the streets of Jalapa in the state of Veracruz as the body of 20-year-old America Sanchez was escorted to her final resting place. She was one of two cadets killed when the Mexican Navy's tall ship collided with the Brooklyn Bridge over the weekend. Sanchez was in her final year at the Naval Academy and was participating in an international goodwill voyage expected to visit 15 countries. The impact snapped the mast of the iconic training vessel, killing both Sanchez and 23-year-old Adal Javier Maldonado Marcus. At least 22 others were injured, 3 of them critically, and 2 remain hospitalized as of Monday. And off to Germany, where 3 dual nationals are on trial in Munich, accused of plotting Russian-backed sabotage on German soil. The suspects, identified only as Dieter S. and Alexander J., as well as Alex D., are all German-Russian citizens. Now, prosecutors say they conspired to carry out attacks on key military and industrial sites, including U.S. military bases, in an effort to weaken Germany's support for Ukraine. The alleged ringleader, Date S., he faces multiple charges, including espionage, conspiracy to cause explosions, and arson, and preparing acts of violence that threaten state security. And off to Asia, where China has reaffirmed its support for direct dialogue between Russia and Ukraine, following claims by U.S. President Donald Trump that talks between the two sides would begin immediately after his phone call with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Now, speaking at a press briefing on Tuesday, Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Mao Ning said Beijing supports all efforts aimed at achieving peace. She emphasized China's position in favor of direct negotiations and a political resolution to the ongoing conflict. Since the outbreak of war in February of 2022, when Russian forces invaded Ukraine, China has maintained that it is a neutral party. However, Western nations have accused Beijing of quietly backing Moscow through economic support and diplomatic cover.
我们注意到有关报道，在乌克兰危机问题上，中方支持一切有利于和平的努力。我们支持俄乌直接对话谈判，支持政治解决危机，希望各方能够通过对话谈判达成一个公平、持久、有约束力，并为各当事方所接受的和平协议。
It's been described as a historic breakthrough in global health. The World Health Organization has adopted a long-awaited pandemic agreement aimed at avoiding the chaos and inequality seen during the COVID-19 crisis. The deal is the result of more than 3 years of negotiations and is designed to prepare the world for whatever comes next. Our international correspondent Afia Hagen has more.
Major milestone in global health diplomacy. The World Health Organization has adopted a landmark pandemic agreement aimed at transforming how the world responds to future health crises. The agreement struck after more than 3 years of negotiations following the devastating COVID-19 pandemic seeks to fix what the WHO calls the disjointed and chaotic global response seen during 2020. Calling it a historic day, WHO Chief Tedros Ghebreyesus hailed the deal as a win for public health, science and international solidarity. The agreement focuses on greater global coordination, improved surveillance and, most critically, equitable access to vaccines and treatments, a key sticking point during COVID-19. Negotiations were tense, especially between wealthy and developing nations, many of whom felt sidelined when it came to accessing life-saving vaccines during the last pandemic. The deal includes a proposed pathogen access and benefit sharing system, which would ensure that any country sharing data on emerging diseases also benefits from treatments and vaccines created as a result. Countries now have until May 2026 to finalise that mechanism before the agreement can be ratified. At least 60 ratifications are needed for it to come into effect. The United Nations notably pulled out of the talks, a move linked to President Donald Trump's earlier decision to withdraw from the WHO altogether. But despite that, the agreement has been widely welcomed, with negotiators calling it a rules-based future-proof system that won't infringe on any national sovereignty. While the framework is now in place, the finer details, especially on sharing vaccines and treatments, will take at least another year to finalise. But for many, the agreement offers hope that the world will be better equipped when the next pandemic strikes. For News Central, I'm Afia Hagen.
And that's Afia Hagen there with that report. And that's all we can take from beyond the continent. Now, do remember that you can send us your eyewitness report to the WhatsApp number now showing on the screen. And while you're at it, please follow us on social media. We're at News Central TV on all social media platforms. You may also watch News Central TV live on DSTV channel 422, Go TV, channel 23, Star Times, channel 274, Avo TV, and stream us live on YouTube as well. Many thanks for watching. I am Judith at TV. Good night.